The day my daughter left her children with me, I believed her because I had raised her to sound sincere. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind that carries no warning. I was folding laundry when I heard her car pull into the driveway too fast, tires crunching the gravel like she was in a hurry to escape something. By the time I stepped onto the porch, she was already unbuckling the youngest from his seat. Her movements rushed, her smile tight and unfinished. "Mom," she said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek, "I just need an hour, maybe two." I remember the way she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. The children spilled into the house with backpacks and toy trucks and the usual chaos that follows small bodies. My oldest grandson, Noah, already carried a seriousness in his face that didn't belong to a boy his age. He stood near the door, watching his mother the way children do when they sense something is about to change, but don't yet have the words for it. "You'll be back before dinner, right?" he asked. My daughter laughed too loudly. Of course. She didn't even bring a coat. I stood on the porch and waved as her car disappeared down the road, thinking nothing of it. Mothers come and go. Life gets busy. I told myself not to be dramatic. An hour passed. Then two. By evening, the sky turned the soft gray of uncertainty, and my phone remained silent. I called her once, straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. I told the children she must have been delayed, cooked dinner like everything was normal, tucked them into bed with stories that ended happily. That night, I didn't sleep. By morning, I knew. There's a knowing that settles deep in your bones before your mind catches up. I made breakfast, packed lunches, braided hair, tied shoelaces, moving on instinct, not thought. I called her again, then again. I called hospitals, friends, anyone who might know something. No one did. By the third day, I contacted the police. They took notes, asked questions, nodded sympathetically. An adult woman missing. No signs of force. No note. No trail. They told me to wait, so I waited. Weeks passed. Then months. The children stopped asking when their mother was coming back. Children adapt when adults fail them. Noah began calling me Grandmom by accident. The youngest forgot the sound of her voice entirely. I sold my car to pay for daycare. Took a second job in the evenings, folding linens at a motel after the kids fell asleep. I learned how to stretch groceries, how to smile through exhaustion, how to love 3 children with a ferocity born from fear of losing them too. I never told them she had abandoned them. I told them she was lost. Years later, long after the children had grown roots in my home, long after our life had settled into something resembling peace, my doorbell rang one afternoon. 2 strangers stood on my porch. One wore a suit. The other held a briefcase. And behind them, just barely visible in the driveway, was my daughter's car. That was the moment I realized the hardest part of this story was not raising children who weren't mine. It was surviving the day their mother came back and claimed I had stolen them. When I opened the door wider, the air shifted. The man in the suit introduced himself first. Calm voice, practiced tone. He didn't look at the children peeking from the hallway behind me. He looked at the house, measuring it, assessing it, as if love could be appraised like property. "I'm here on behalf of Miss Laura Bennett," he said, using my daughter's full name like a shield. Hearing her name spoken so formally after all those years felt wrong, like hearing a stranger hum a lullaby. "This is my home," I replied, "and those are my grandchildren." He nodded politely. "She claims otherwise." The second man finally spoke. "We'll be filing a petition for immediate custody review." Immediate. That word hit me harder than anything else. I felt Noah's hand slip into mine. He was taller now, nearly a teenager, but the grip was the same one he'd used when he was 5 and afraid of the dark. "Grandma," he whispered, "what's happening?" I knelt beside him, keeping my voice steady. "Go help your brother with his homework," I said. "Everything's okay." It was a lie, but it was a loving one. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the faint scratches left behind by years of homework and art projects. I had always known this day might come. I just hadn't known how cold it would feel. That night, I didn't cry. I went to the closet and pulled down a worn shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were documents folded and refolded so many times the creases had softened like fabric. Letters, receipts, school records, doctor visits signed by me, permission slips, birthday cards addressed to Mom, but signed with my name. And at the very bottom, sealed in a manila envelope, was the thing I had never shown anyone. The next morning, I hired a lawyer of my own. Not a flashy one. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes who listened more than she spoke. "She says you kidnapped them," the lawyer asked quietly. "Yes," I said. After she vanished, she leaned back in her chair. "Did she ever contact you?" "No." "Support them financially?" "No." "Attempt visitation?" "No." She closed the folder. "Then she's not here for the children." "What is she here for?" I asked. The lawyer met my gaze. "Control or guilt or money, sometimes all three." The court date was set quickly, too quickly. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to honor myself. The children watched silently as I put on my coat. "Are they taking us away?" my youngest asked. I knelt and held his face in my hands. "No one is taking anyone," I said softly. "I promise." But promises are fragile when made in hallways that smell like fear. As we walked into the courthouse, I saw my daughter sitting on a bench, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She looked older, but not softer. She didn't look at the children. Not once. That was when I understood something chilling. She wasn't there to reclaim her family. She was there to rewrite history. And I was the only one standing in her way. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No grand drama. No raised voices. just pale walls, hard benches, and the quiet weight of decisions that change lives forever. I sat with my lawyer on one side, the children beside me, their feet not quite touching the floor. Across the room, my daughter sat stiffly next to her attorney, eyes forward, jaw set. She still hadn't looked at them. The judge entered, an older man with tired eyes and a voice that carried authority without effort. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the room slowly, as if trying to read the truth before anyone spoke. "Let's begin," he said. My daughter knew how to cry on cue. I remembered that from her childhood. When she spoke, her voice trembled just enough. "I trusted my mother," she said. "I left my children with her temporarily, and when I tried to come back, she refused. She isolated them from me. She took them." The words stung, even though I had prepared for them. The judge turned to me. "Ma'am, is that accurate?" I stood carefully, smoothing my coat. "No, Your Honor." I told the story slowly, not defensively, not emotionally, just truth, one piece at a time. The hour she promised, the days that followed, the police reports, the years without a call. My lawyer passed forward the first stack of documents. School records with my name listed as guardian, medical consent forms, tax filings, letters from teachers who knew the children as mine in every way that mattered. The judge listened without interruption. Then my daughter's attorney stood. "Why didn't you pursue legal custody sooner?" he asked. I swallowed. "Because I hoped she would come back," I said. "And because I didn't want to make it permanent for the children if it didn't have to be." The judge nodded slowly. That was when my daughter finally turned toward me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. "She's lying," she said suddenly. I tried to come back. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of that?" She hesitated. I felt my lawyer's hand rest gently on my arm. "Your Honor," she said, "we do." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. My hands shook just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. "I've carried this for years," I said. "I didn't want to use it, but I will if I have to." The judge leaned forward. "What is it?" "A letter," I replied. "Left behind the day she disappeared." The courtroom stilled. My daughter's face drained of color. The judge held out his hand. "May I see it?" I walked forward and placed the envelope on the bench. The seal was still intact. He opened it carefully and began to read. His expression changed, not shock, recognition. He looked up and asked a question so quietly it barely carried across the room. "Do the children know about this?" I met his gaze and shook my head. "Not yet," I said, and in that moment, I understood that truth has its own timing, and that the hardest secrets are not the ones that hurt us, but the ones that protect others until they're strong enough to hear them. The judge didn't read the letter out loud. That alone told me everything. He folded it carefully, placed it back into the envelope, and rested his hand on it as if it carried more weight than the law books stacked beside him. The courtroom remained silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. My daughter stared at the floor. For the first time since she'd returned, she looked small. "I will need a brief recess," the judge said. 10 minutes. 10 minutes can stretch into a lifetime when your heart is sitting in your throat. We were escorted into a narrow hallway outside the courtroom. The children sat beside me on a bench, their legs swinging gently, unaware of how close their world had come to shifting beneath their feet. Noah leaned toward me. "Grandma, are we in trouble?" I brushed his hair back the way I had 1,000 times before. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups are just talking." Down the hall, my daughter paced in tight circles, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. Once, she looked at me, really looked, but her gaze slid away as if it burned. My lawyer leaned close. "That letter changes everything," she said quietly. "But what the judge decides next will depend on what he believes is best for the children." Best for the children. Those words had guided every choice I'd made for nearly a decade. When we were called back in, the judge looked different, straighter, more resolved. "I have reviewed the contents of the letter," he said, his voice steady. "And I have also reviewed the evidence presented." He turned first to my daughter. "Miss Bennett, this document establishes clear intent on your part at the time you left the children." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "You voluntarily relinquished care," the judge continued, "with no timeline for return, no request for updates, no provision for support." He then turned to me. "And you," he said, "provided stability, education, medical care, and emotional continuity during their formative years." My chest tightened. "At this time," the judge said, "I see no evidence of kidnapping." My daughter's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor," the judge raised a hand. "I'm not finished." He looked down at the file once more. "However, there are matters of disclosure and emotional impact that must be handled carefully." He glanced toward the children. "They have built their understanding of the world on one version of events," he said. "Altering that understanding abruptly could cause harm." I nodded. "That's why I waited." The judge studied me for a long moment, then nodded back. "Temporary guardianship will remain as is," he ruled. "Any future contact will be supervised and gradual, pending further evaluation." The gavel came down softly. It was over, or so I thought. As we gathered our things, my daughter finally approached me. Her voice was low, tight. "You planned this," she said. I met her eyes calmly. "I planned to protect them." She leaned closer. "They'll hate you when they find out." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "They'll understand why I loved them enough to wait." Her face twisted, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous: regret. And I knew then that the real trial wasn't over, because the hardest part wasn't winning in court. It was deciding when the children were ready to learn the truth about the mother who left them behind. We didn't go home right away after the hearing. The children were restless, their energy buzzing with questions they didn't yet know how to ask. So I took them for ice cream, the same little shop we'd gone to after every school milestone, every doctor's visit, every small victory that deserved sugar and a moment to breathe. Normalcy matters when life feels unsteady. They talked about school projects and soccer practice, arguing over flavors like nothing in the world had almost changed. I watched them laugh and thought about how fragile truth can be when handled without care. That night, after they were asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the manila envelope in front of me. I hadn't opened it in years. The paper inside had yellowed slightly, but the words were still sharp, written in a hurried hand. No date, no apology. She had said she wasn't ready to be a mother, that she needed to start over, that the children would be better off with me for now. She asked me not to look for her, and at the very end, one sentence that never stopped hurting. Please don't tell them I chose this. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. That was the promise I had kept for years. The next weeks were quiet, but not peaceful. Social workers visited. Reports were written. Schedules were discussed. My daughter was allowed short, supervised visits at a family center downtown. The first time the children saw her again, they didn't run. They stood still. She tried to hug them. The youngest let her. The middle one followed after a pause. Noah stayed back, his face guarded in a way no child's should ever have to be. Hi, she said brightly, as if time had simply skipped forward. Hi, he replied, polite and distant. Afterward, he asked me, why does she feel like a stranger? I answered honestly, but gently, because she's been gone a long time. He nodded. That's what it feels like. Each visit chipped away at something for all of us. My daughter grew frustrated that love didn't return on command. The children grew confused, caught between memory and reality. And I stood in the middle, holding space where answers would eventually have to live. One evening, Noah came to me with the envelope in his hands. I saw this in your drawer, he said. Is it about Mom? My heart stopped. He was old enough now, stronger, curious in the way children become when silence starts to feel heavy. Yes, I said slowly. It is. Is it bad? He asked. I thought of the judge's question. Do they know about this? Not bad, I said. Just complicated. He sat beside me. I want to know. And in that moment, I understood that protecting children doesn't mean hiding the truth forever. It means choosing the right moment to let it be spoken with love. I placed my hand over the envelope. Tomorrow, I said. We'll talk tomorrow. That night, I didn't sleep because the next day wouldn't just change how the children saw their mother. It would change how they understood who had stayed when it mattered most. Morning came too quickly. The house was quiet in that soft, careful way it gets when something important is waiting to be said. I made breakfast slowly, eggs, toast, the the familiar rhythm of mornings that had held us together for years. The children sat at the table, unusually still. Even the youngest sensed the weight in the air. After the dishes were cleared, I asked them to join me in the living room. We sat close on the couch, knees touching, sunlight spilling across the carpet. The manila envelope rested in my lap, heavier now than it had ever felt in the courtroom. "I want to tell you a story," I said. "But before I do, I need you to know something." They looked at me, eyes wide and trusting. "No matter what you hear," I continued, "you were loved. Every single day." Noah nodded slowly. "Okay." I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the responsibility of holding their hearts in my words. I didn't read it exactly as it was written. Some sentences were too sharp, too adult. I softened what needed softening without changing the truth. I told them their mother had been overwhelmed, that she left believing it would be temporary, that she asked me to take care of them while she tried to figure out her life. And then the middle one asked quietly, "And then she didn't come back," I said. Silence followed, not shock, not tears at first, just processing. Noah stared at the floor. "So she didn't lose us," he said slowly. "She chose to leave." "Yes," I replied, "but not because of you." He looked up at me, eyes bright with questions that had lived inside him for years. "Did she ever ask about us?" I didn't answer right away. Honesty requires courage. "No," I said gently. "She didn't." The youngest crawled into my lap, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You stayed," he said simply. "Yes," I whispered. "I stayed." Tears came then, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and steady, the kind that cleans rather than breaks. I held them all, letting the truth settle into its proper place. That afternoon, Noah asked if he could go for a walk with me. We walked slowly down the familiar street, leaves crunching under our feet. "I'm not mad," he said. "I just understand now." I squeezed his hand. "That's all I hoped for." That evening, my daughter called. "They know, don't they?" she said sharply. "Yes," I replied. There was a long pause. Then, softer, "What did they say?" "They said thank you for giving them life," I answered, "and they thanked me for raising them." She didn't speak after that. I hung up and sat by the window, watching the lights come on in houses up and down the street. Homes filled with ordinary lives, ordinary mistakes, ordinary love. Truth doesn't always bring peace right away, but it brings clarity. And clarity, I had learned, is the beginning of healing, even when it hurts. After that day, things didn't settle the way people imagine they should. There was no dramatic closure, no perfect forgiveness, just a slow, careful reshaping of our lives around a truth that now had a voice. The children changed in small ways first. The youngest became quieter, more thoughtful. He started asking questions about choices, why people do what they do, why grown-ups sometimes leave. The middle one grew protective, stepping in front of his siblings when voices rose during supervised visits. Noah, though, surprised me most. He grew lighter. It was as if understanding freed him from a question he'd been carrying since childhood. Once, while we were folding laundry together, he said, "I always thought if I was better, she'd come back." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. "You were always enough." He nodded. "I know that now." Supervised visits continued, but they became shorter. My daughter struggled with the reality that love cannot be rushed and trust cannot be demanded. She brought gifts, too many, too expensive, but the children wanted conversation, not compensation. One afternoon, after a visit, she confronted me in the parking lot. "You turned them against me," she said, her voice low and shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. "No," I said calmly. "I stopped lying to them." She looked at me as if that distinction had never occurred to her. Weeks passed, then months. The court ordered a full evaluation, home visits, psychological assessments, long forms filled with longer questions. Through it all, I stayed steady, not perfect, but present. One evening, my lawyer called. "The judge has made a preliminary determination," she said. "Permanent guardianship in your favor." I closed my eyes, not from victory, but relief. "She may appeal," the lawyer added, "but her case is weak." When I told the children, they didn't cheer, they exhaled. That night, Noah asked a question I hadn't expected. "Grandma," he said, "do you regret taking us in?" I sat beside him on his bed and brushed his hair back the way I used to when he was small. "Never," I said, "not for 1 second." "But it was hard," he pressed. "Yes," I admitted. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done." He thought about that. "Hard doesn't mean wrong," he said. I smiled. "Exactly." As the house quieted, I stood in the doorway of their rooms, listening to the soft rhythm of sleep. 13, no, more than a decade of scraped knees, homework battles, laughter, tears, ordinary days stitched together by love. I hadn't planned this life, but I had chosen it every single day. And that was the difference. Because love isn't proven by words spoken in courtrooms. It's proven by showing up when someone else walks away. And as I turned off the lights, I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next, the children finally knew the truth. And that truth had set them free. The house felt different once the court's decision settled into our days. Not louder, not quieter, just steadier. There was no longer a sense of waiting, no footstep we strained to hear, no phone call we feared might change everything. For the first time in years, the children slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes when uncertainty loosens its grip. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm. School mornings, packed lunches, notes on the fridge, soccer games and science fairs. The small, beautiful routines that build a childhood without anyone noticing. My daughter became a shadow at the edges of our lives. She still called occasionally, still asked for updates, but the urgency had faded. Reality had finally caught up with the story she'd been telling herself, and it didn't fit the ending she'd imagined. One evening, she asked if she could come by. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes right away either. I asked the children. They talked quietly among themselves. Then Noah spoke for all three. "We can see her," he said, "but we don't want her to stay long." So she came. She sat on the couch where bedtime stories had been read for years, in a house she no longer recognized as hers. The children were polite, kind, reserved. After a while, she turned to me. "You did a good job," she said quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. After she left, I stood alone in the living room, touching the familiar furniture, the photos lining the walls. Every piece of this life had been built one day at a time, without guarantees, without applause. That night, as I tucked the youngest in, he asked, "Will she be okay?" I paused. "Yes," I said. "She'll have to be like us," he asked. I smiled softly. "Like you." Later, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold, I thought about the letter, the one that started everything. It no longer lived in my drawer. I had returned it to its envelope and placed it in a safe place, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Truth doesn't need to be used. It only needs to be honored. I had spent so many years fearing this moment, afraid that telling the truth would fracture the children, afraid that facing it would undo us all. Instead, it had anchored us. Sometimes, the stories we're afraid to tell are the very ones that give our lives meaning. And as I turned out the lights, I realized something else too. I hadn't stolen these children. I had been entrusted with them, and that trust, earned through years of love, patience, and presence, was something no court could ever take away. People often ask me how it felt when everything finally settled. They expect me to say relieved, or vindicated, or even happy. The truth is quieter than that. What I felt most was peace, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but slowly replaces the ache you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. One evening, long after the court papers were filed away, and the visits had become rare and predictable, Noah sat with me on the back steps as the sun dipped low behind the trees. "Grandma," he said, skipping a pebble across the yard, "do you think she ever planned to come back?" I thought carefully before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because some truths need to be wrapped gently. "I think she hoped she would," I said. "But hope isn't the same as commitment." He nodded, satisfied. "You always came back," he said. Those words stayed with me, not because they praised me, but because they defined love in the simplest way possible. Showing up. Years from now, the children will remember many things. They'll remember scraped knees and school plays and the way our house smelled on Sundays. They'll remember that life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. They'll remember that when the world became uncertain, someone stayed. As for my daughter, she found her own path eventually. I heard about a job, a new city, a quieter life. We speak occasionally, carefully, respectfully, without rewriting the past. We are no longer locked in a struggle over blame. Some relationships don't return to what they were, they become something else, and that's okay. If there's one lesson I carry forward now, one I wish I could pass to every grandmother, every woman who has ever been asked to carry more than her share, it's this: love does not require martyrdom. Responsibility does not erase choice, and stepping in when others step away is not theft, it is courage. I didn't kidnap my grandchildren. I caught them when they were dropped, and I held them long enough for them to grow strong on their own. Now, when I watch them walk out the door each morning, confident, curious, unafraid, I know something with certainty. The truth didn't destroy us. It gave us roots. And sometimes, the family you save is the one that saves you right back. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.